Everyone thinks they know what Luke Skywalker chose on Bespin. Almost no one is asked what the galaxy would have looked like if he'd chosen differently, and why that alternative is far darker than the rebellion ever admitted. The moment is burned into cultural memory. Luke Skywalker, hanging from a weather vane at the bottom of Cloud City, his hand gone, his mentor's greatest secret still ringing in his ears. Darth Vader's offer suspended in the cold air between them. Join me, and together we can rule the galaxy as father and son. Luke dropped, and because he dropped, we have always treated that offer as a dead end, a villain's temptation that a hero refused, the kind of fork in the road that good stories acknowledge and then leave behind. But the question that most viewers never linger on is not whether Luke was right to refuse. The question is, what would have actually happened if he hadn't? Not in the abstract, not as a moral thought experiment. What would the galaxy's political machinery, its force-sensitive bloodlines, its military power structures, and its most calculating minds have actually produced if Luke Skywalker had taken his father's hand? The answer is not the triumphant father-son empire that Vader described. It is something considerably worse. The way most people frame this scenario is straightforward and almost romantic in its dark simplicity. Luke joins Vader. The two most powerful Force users in the galaxy align. The Emperor is eventually overthrown because that was always Vader's intention, whether he admitted it or not, and a new order rises with a Skywalker at the top of every tier. It's the story Vader was selling, a dynasty, a correction. The Sith rule of two finally resolved into something larger and more stable. This version of events has always been seductive because it centers on the characters we already understand. Vader wants his son. Luke wants his father. The Emperor is the obstacle. Remove the Emperor, the story becomes a tragedy, with a different ending, still dark, but somehow comprehensible. Because the version Vader was selling and the version the Emperor was planning were not the same story. They were never the same story. Vader believed he was offering Luke a partnership. The Emperor had already decided what Luke Skywalker was for. And those two things, the father's hope and the Emperor's calculation, were on a collision course that Luke's refusal actually prevented. When Luke dropped into that shaft, he didn't just save himself. He may have saved Vader from a trap that Vader had already walked into without knowing it. The official story assumes Vader was in control of the offer he was making. That assumption does not survive scrutiny. Start with the timing, because the timing is where the first crack appears. Vader reveals Luke's parentage at the exact moment Luke is physically and psychologically broken, one hand severed, his entire understanding of his own origin destroyed, his mentor exposed as someone who lied to him about the most important fact of his life. Vader has chosen this moment with surgical precision. The offer isn't incidental, it's calibrated, which means someone had already thought through the conditions under which Luke Skywalker would be most receptive to turning. And here's the detail that matters. Vader did not come to Bespin with that speech prepared because he improvised it in the moment. He came to Bespin because the Emperor sent him, which means the Emperor already knew what offer Vader would make. And that's only possible if the Emperor had already decided what happened next, regardless of whether Luke accepted or refused. Think about what the Emperor does and does not react to across the original trilogy. He is not a man caught off guard by events. He is a man who has constructed conditions so carefully that multiple outcomes serve his purpose. When Luke arrives on the Death Star 2 in Return of the Jedi, the Emperor tells Vader outright, "This was my plan." He wanted Luke there. He wanted the confrontation. He had already calculated the emotional leverage that Vader's presence would provide. The Emperor does not improvise. He architects. So when Vader made that offer on Bespin, when the father extended his hand to the son, the Emperor had already modeled what happened if Luke took it. And this is where it becomes disturbing. If Luke accepts, He arrives at the Emperor's court as Vader's son and Vader's prize. That is not a position of power. That is a position of vulnerability dressed up in the language of power. The Emperor's entire method of control rests on one mechanism: find what someone loves and use it as a leash. Vader's love for Padme was the mechanism of his original fall. His grief, his guilt, his desperate need to impose order on a universe that had taken everything from him, all of it, was the Emperor's instrument. If Luke arrives at court as the thing Vader loves most, then Luke becomes the most effective leash the Emperor has ever held. Vader would not be gaining a partner, he would be delivering one. If that detail matters, and it does, then it means the Emperor's patience at Bespin wasn't indifference. It was anticipation. He was waiting to see which version of the future Luke Skywalker would hand him. Now consider the second crack, because it cuts deeper. Luke's power in the Force at the time of Bespin is already significant, but it is not complete. He left Dagobah early. Yoda told him directly that his training was incomplete, which means a Luke who accepts Vader's offer arrives at the Imperial court undertrained, psychologically shattered, and emotionally exposed. He is not arriving as an equal. He is arriving as someone who believes he is joining a partnership when he is actually entering a structure designed to consume him. The Emperor does not train Sith apprentices. He creates instruments. Every Sith Lord who served Palpatine, Maul, Tyrannus, Vader himself, was not a partner. They were extensions of a single will, tools convinced they were collaborators. If Luke joins Vader, Luke does not become the second most powerful man in the galaxy. He becomes the newest instrument in a collection that the Emperor has been curating for decades, which means someone needed Luke broken before he arrived. And Bespin did exactly that. The third crack is the one that most people walk past without noticing, because it requires sitting with an uncomfortable question about Vader himself. Throughout the original trilogy, Vader is presented as the Emperor's enforcer, loyal, obedient, ferociously effective. But there is a persistent current of something else running beneath that obedience. The offer to Luke at Bespin is not sanctioned behavior. Vader is supposed to be capturing Luke, not recruiting him. The Emperor's instruction was to bring Luke to him. Vader's improvisation, the offer, the parentage reveal, the explicit invitation to overthrow the Emperor together is a deviation, a significant one, which raises a question that the narrative rarely examines directly. Was Vader's offer to Luke something the Emperor had anticipated, accounted for, and was content to let happen? Or was it the first genuine act of defiance Vader had managed in 20 years? And if so, what does it mean that it failed? If Vader was acting against the Emperor's wishes in that moment, then Luke's refusal didn't just save Luke. It collapsed the only window Vader had ever found to act independently. And if that's true, then every subsequent year of the Empire, every system subjugated, every rebel cell crushed, every atrocity committed in the Emperor's name continued in part because Luke dropped instead of reaching back. The walls are closing in on the comfortable version of this story. Here is the version of events that emerges when you connect those cracks into a single line. The Emperor permitted Vader's pursuit of Luke and permitted the Bespin confrontation because he understood that one of two outcomes would serve him. Either Luke refuses and survives, becoming a symbol the rebellion will eventually bring to him directly, which is exactly what happens in Return of the Jedi, or Luke accepts and arrives at court as a broken, undertrained, emotionally compromised young man in love with a father who is already completely controlled. In that second version, the Emperor receives not a threat, but a gift, the most powerful Force lineage in the galaxy, both halves of it delivered into his personal architecture of control. The most likely explanation is that Palpatine had already begun modeling Luke's potential years before Bespin. The moment the Death Star was destroyed by a Force-sensitive pilot with no formal training, the Emperor would have understood what he was dealing with. Anakin Skywalker's son. Alive. Untrained, but already effective. A variable that could not be allowed to develop independently. From that point forward, every interaction the Empire had with Luke Skywalker, every near capture, every escalating confrontation, every moment where the Empire could have simply killed him and didn't begins to look less like failure and more like patience. The Emperor wanted Luke Skywalker in his throne room. The question was always, which version of Luke would arrive? The one who had refused everything and had to be broken directly, or the one who had already been cracked open on Bespin and delivered by his own father. Now, here is where the hidden motive becomes genuinely dark. Vader's offer, on the surface, was about family, about reunion, about the kind of connection that Anakin Skywalker had been denied and destroyed by. But underneath the emotional language, the offer had a specific mechanical structure. Join me, and together we can rule the galaxy and destroy the Emperor. The destruction of the Emperor was the bait. Vader was offering Luke not just a father, but a purpose, the purpose of being the instrument by which Palpatine finally falls, which is exactly what Luke eventually became in Return of the Jedi, without joining Vader. While maintaining everything that made him who he was, the implication here is unsettling. If Luke had joined at Bespin, the destruction of the Emperor might have happened earlier, but it would have happened through a Luke Skywalker who had accepted corruption as the price of that destruction. A Luke who had reached for power at his lowest moment, who had allowed his grief and his fury to convince him that the right response to discovering his father was to become his father's weapon. The Emperor might have fallen, but what stood over that fallen Emperor would not have been Luke Skywalker. It would have been something the Emperor had already finished building. And this is the detail that changes how we see the entire saga. The Emperor's genius was not in creating evil. It was in finding people who wanted to do good people with genuine love, genuine grief, genuine righteous anger, and giving them a structure in which those feelings led inevitably to catastrophic choices. Anakin Skywalker didn't fall because he was weak. He fell because he loved too much and was given no way to protect what he loved except through the Emperor's tools. If Luke had taken Vader's hand, the same mechanism would have activated. A young man who loved his father, who wanted his family back, who was in physical agony and psychological freefall, given a purpose that felt like redemption but was actually one more step in the Emperor's architecture. The rebellion Luke would have been fighting for, in that timeline, would not have been the rebellion. It would have been Palpatine's next designed outcome, wearing the face of a Skywalker father and son. That doesn't prove the Emperor orchestrated Bespin from the beginning, but it explains why the alignment between his known methods and the offer Vader made is so difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Map it forward. Luke accepts Vader's hand on Bespin. What does the galaxy look like in the years that follow? The first consequence arrives almost immediately, and it is one that most versions of this thought experiment skip over entirely. The rebellion does not simply continue without Luke. Luke Skywalker, at the time of Bespin, is not just a pilot or a soldier. He is a symbol, the rebellion's propaganda, its emotional center, its living proof that the Empire could be resisted by ordinary people from ordinary places. All of that was bound to Luke in ways that the rebellion's leadership understood but rarely said aloud. The moment Luke becomes imperial, or even the moment his capture is announced, the rebellion fractures. Not because the cause was wrong, because movements run on belief, and Luke's defection would be the most visible possible proof that even the best among them could be turned. Leia knows this, Han knows this, Mon Mothma knows this. The rebellion would continue. It was never only one person, but it would do so in a significantly degraded state, without its most powerful, force-sensitive asset, Without the emotional mythology of the farm boy who blew up the Death Star, and with the active knowledge that Darth Vader's son had now aligned with the Empire. The second consequence is the one that cuts through the military calculus directly into the human cost. Without a functional rebellion applying constant pressure, the Emperor's timeline for consolidation accelerates. The campaigns that were being disrupted, delayed, diverted by rebel operations they complete. Systems that were holding out in hope of liberation don't hold out. The people on those systems don't wait for rescue that isn't coming. That is not a dramatic flourish. That is the mechanical consequence of removing organized resistance from a totalitarian structure. People die who would not have died. Communities are destroyed that were being protected by the existence of an active military opposition. This is the cost of Luke's acceptance that no one in the scenario is calculating, because everyone in the scenario is focused on the throne room politics, on Vader and Luke and Palpatine and the abstract question of who rules. The people who pay for Luke's choice to accept power are the people who never had any power to begin with. The third consequence is the one that involves Vader most directly, and it is the darkest thing this thought experiment produces. Vader's stated goal, destroy the Emperor, rule with his son, assumes that Vader has enough independent agency remaining to actually execute that plan. But here's what the Emperor demonstrated consistently across his entire reign. He never permitted any person inside his structure to accumulate loyalty, capability, or connection that wasn't filtered through him. The moment Luke arrives at court as Vader's son, as Vader's attachment, as the person Vader has moved to protect, he becomes leverage. The Emperor had held Vader for 20 years through a combination of physical dependency, psychological manipulation, and the systematic destruction of everything Vader had ever loved. Luke's presence doesn't break that structure, it deepens it. Vader cannot move against the Emperor while the Emperor holds Luke. And the Emperor, the moment Luke is at court, holds Luke completely. The implication is hard to ignore. In the joined timeline, Vader's dream of overthrowing Palpatine becomes less achievable, not more. He is now protecting something the Emperor can threaten. He is now more exposed, not less. The father who offered his son a partnership may have understood, on some level, that the partnership was the trap, and may have made the offer anyway, because 20 years of isolation and grief had stripped away the ability to calculate anything except the need to not be alone, which raises a darker possibility about Bespin that the film never makes explicit. What if Vader knew it wasn't going to work? What if some part of Anakin Skywalker, buried under everything the Emperor had built on top of him, understood that the offer was already compromised, already inside the Emperor's architecture, and made it anyway, because even a doomed connection was better than no connection at all? Not a strategic gambit, a desperate one. A father reaching for his son not because he had a plan, but because he had run out of everything except wanting. If that's what happened on Bespin, if the offer was less a calculated power move and more a fractured man's last attempt at something human, then Luke's refusal didn't just reject an alliance, it rejected a confession. And what Luke found instead, 3 years later in that throne room, was not the strategic Vader of Bespin, but the human remainder that the Emperor hadn't quite managed to destroy. That human remainder was always the variable the Emperor hadn't fully accounted for. And it only existed because Luke didn't take the hand. Consider what the joined timeline does to that remainder. Luke at court. Luke being shaped, slowly, by imperial systems, imperial violence, imperial justification. Luke watching his father move through the galaxy as the Emperor's instrument and telling himself, it's temporary, it's necessary, the real plan is still coming. That is not a description of a Jedi in waiting. That is a description of how good people become complicit, incrementally, with reasons. The joined Luke doesn't stay Luke for long. he becomes something the Emperor finishes building more sophisticated than Vader, because Luke was not broken by grief the way Anakin was. Luke would have been broken by his own choices. And a person broken by their own choices is harder to redeem, because they cannot blame circumstance. They can only face what they decided. The Emperor understood this. It's why he was patient. It's why both outcomes at Bespin served him. A Luke who refuses is a Luke the Emperor can collect later, when he's ready. A Luke who accepts is a Luke the Emperor is already finished building. The only version of events the Emperor didn't plan for was the one that actually happened. A Luke who refused, survived, continued to grow, and arrived at the Death Star 2 not as a supplicant or a weapon, but as someone who had decided, fully and consciously, that he was going to try to save his father instead of destroy his enemy. That choice to reach for Vader rather than through him was the move that broke the Emperor's architecture. Not power, not combat. A son choosing his father over the outcome. And if the joined timeline had unfolded, if Luke had taken that hand, the architecture never breaks. It absorbs, it grows, and the galaxy that emerges from it wears the name Skywalker over a structure that Palpatine designed, staffed, and would have continued to operate through father and son without either of them fully realizing it until far too late. If that's what Luke's acceptance would have produced, then his fall at Bespin wasn't the worst-case scenario. It was the Emperor's preferred one. Here is the thing about Vader's offer that the film frames as a villain's temptation and the audience has always understood as a test Luke passed. It wasn't a test. It wasn't a temptation. It was a door that opened onto a room the Emperor had already furnished. Luke dropping into that shaft wounded, fatherless, betrayed by the lie Obi-Wan told him about his own origin, was not the moment a hero chose good over evil. It was the moment a young man, at the absolute limit of his endurance, refused a gift, because something in him recognized that the gift was already compromised, not through calculation, not through training, through whatever it is that makes a person reach for what's true rather than what's offered. The galaxy that exists at the end of Return of the Jedi, imperfect, still dangerous, politically fragile, exists because of that refusal. Because Luke fell. Because Luke survived. Because Luke came back 3 years later not with power accumulated under Imperial sponsorship, but with something the Emperor's entire architecture was not designed to process: the genuine, uncorrupted decision to believe that his father was still in there. The Emperor could model defiance, he could model ambition, he could model grief and love and the slow erosion of idealism under pressure. What he could not model was the specific kind of irrational hope that makes a person walk into a trap on purpose without a weapon they're willing to use because they've decided that the person on the other side of that trap is worth the risk. That is what Luke brought to the Death Star 2, not power, certainty about something the Emperor had dismissed as weakness. And the question worth sitting with, the one this scenario forces into view once you follow the joined timeline to its conclusion, is whether that certainty was something Luke was always going to find, or whether it was something he could only find because he had already survived the worst version of himself. Whether the fall at Bespin was, in some way that defies the logic of control and calculation, exactly the thing that made the ending possible. And if that's true, what else have we mistaken for failure? If you want more Star Wars truths that are rarely examined, you know where to find them. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below and tell us this. If Luke had taken Vader's hand on Bespin, do you think he ever could have found his way back, or was that the moment the light would have gone out for good?